October 31st, 2018. It's also the 22nd day of Cheshvan, 5779. And we're going to do lesson 4 of the course, Wrestling with Faith. So, I was in somebody's, I visited, just for the benefit of the recording, we are, this past Saturday morning, America witnessed the most horrific anti-Semitic crime that was perpetrated on American soil. The 11 Jews in Pittsburgh that were killed while they were celebrating Shabbat in their temple, and therefore we're having this class to
I think it was
give
a bris.
us perspective.
I think it was
yeah,
a bris.
I think it was a bris on Shabbat.
There
Bris
were,
on
there were
Shabbat.
there were 3 different groups celebrating Shabbat differently. And
So we are having this discussion to give us some perspective and to kind of take the Torah's view. And throughout the week, today is Wednesday night, so right away on Saturday night, I got an email from the assisted living that I service. They wanted me to do a prayer service for them, which I did on Monday afternoon. They all gathered, they all came to the prayer service. I spent a half an hour talking about saying prayers and talking about the Torah perspective. And I got text messages from some teens in the neighborhood, one college student and a couple of teens. They wanted to know, what they can do, what should they do. And we had a meeting on Monday night at our home. We talked with them, we talked about that. On Tuesday, I went to someone's office, and he says, I come and I put tefillin with them. I said, Mark, it's time to pray to God. He's like, I don't know. Pray to God after what happened on Saturday morning, I actually invited him to the class tonight. Maybe he'll still show up. But I said, come Wednesday night, we're going to give a class about it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to give perspective.
So what were some of the things that you recommended?
So we're going to talk about everything. So he said, how long is it going to take for you to give the answer? So I said, it's an hour and 15-minute class. He's like, it's going to take an hour and 15 minutes to... He wants to know, what do people want to know? People want to know, where's God when such a thing happens? Does God care about us? Did God abandon us? Why doesn't he intervene? Perhaps God doesn't exist. Perhaps this is a proof that there is no God, if such a thing can happen. The bottom line is that I think a lot of what I'm going to say, you already know. A lot of what I'm going to say, you already know. And the truth is, there's nothing that I can say that will make you step out of here tonight and say, now I understand. Oh, now I understand how God could allow it to happen. The question is, how could God allow it to happen? So there's nothing that anybody can answer that you say, oh, now it makes sense. It's just not the nature of pain. When somebody is in pain, let's speak about a physical pain. Somebody cuts their finger with a knife, and they scream bloody murder. And the mom explains to them, the knife is sharp, and when it slices the skin in that way, it triggers the nerves that send signal to the brains that cause pain. That doesn't take away the pain, right? That's actually very annoying, and it's not appreciated. And when it comes to emotional pain and grief to such a level, it is completely useless. It's completely counterproductive to explain and to rationalize why something happened. And therefore, that's not what I'm going to do tonight. What I'm going to do is to, as I mentioned, offer perspective, the Torah perspective, try to understand where our pains come from, and also where our doubts in God come from. Where does our struggle with faith come from? how could God allow such evil to exist? So we're going to start in your copies on page 102, because this is lesson 4. So if you'll notice, by the way, if you just turn to the first page, turn from the first page to the third page, this class is being given in loving memory of the victims of the Pittsburgh massacre. So that has the names of the people who were killed. And, when somebody is killed for the sake of their being Jewish, they're called a martyr. They're called holy martyrs. And we ask that God should avenge their blood. So let us now turn to the next page, which, if you'll notice on the top, it says 102. So even though it's only page number 4 in our copies, it's page number 102 in the book. See it? The shaded page. Exercise number 1. This is a very important exercise so that we know how to proceed. First of all, please tell me true or false if you agree with the statement or you disagree with the statement. We'll do the first 3. When we suffer tragedy, we seek to understand its cause and its meaning. I think that's true. People who suffer tragedy are looking for a cause and for a meaning of the tragedy. You agree with that statement, Brad?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you say, Karen?
I don't know where anti-Semitism goes into this.
Okay, so
That's where my problem is. And I think that goes into here trying to understand.
So this is a situation where you feel you can understand. But let me explain. Let me explain, and I'm going to get to what you're saying. Okay. When we find cause or meaning, it helps alleviate some of the pain. We don't feel as bad. I want to give you 2 examples.
Yeah, it's like closure. It's
Okay.
sort of...
People call it closure,
Okay.
right? I would say that's connected more with the word meaning. I'll give you an example of that. I think several years ago, there was a story about a father and a son that were walking from the religious community, and the son somehow touched an electric fence, and the father somehow pulled his son away. The father was killed, and the son survived. What can you say? But in a certain way, when you realize that the father put his life on the line and was actually killed in order to save his son, it's some measure of some ointment, some measure of relief. The father, wow, he knowingly put himself in danger to save his child.
But actually, something like that probably happened so quickly, he may not have even knowingly known that.
Okay.
Right. You have to think, can it go through, what I'm saying?
Right, that's
true.
Okay.
It sounds that way, but yeah.
That's a valid point.
Right.
It's a valid point. I read a story about a woman actually who grew up in this neighborhood in Jericho. Not grew up, but she lived. She grew up in Shanghai during the war. She was a German citizen.
The refugees? Yeah, I interviewed some of them.
She was a German citizen. Her parents escaped in 1938 after Kristallnacht.
Was her last name begin with R?
Yes.
I interviewed her.
Okay.
Yeah.
She wrote a book.
Yes, and while she was doing the interview with me, she was on her cordless phone doing the treadmill.
Okay. So
I remember that.
Okay. So I just picked an example. I remember reading it in her book. So in Shanghai, in 1943, they were forced to move into the ghettos, to the ghetto, to a certain area. That was a ghetto for the Jews. The Germans actually wanted to get rid of all the Jews at that time. It didn't work. The Japanese weren't in on the game, thankfully. And she writes how the yeshiva students did not want to move into the ghetto. There were a group of yeshivas, big yeshiva of, I think 100 or 200 boys that were studying. They went to Japan. They moved to Shanghai. They didn't want to move into the ghetto. And they gave them a 1 warning and a 2nd warning and a 3rd warning. And finally, they took a group of them and they put them in jail. And they contracted an illness in jail, and some of them died. And it was a tragedy. Young yeshiva students, they died, and they finally moved into the ghetto. But there were a few that died. And she writes how it was very, very sad, but they couldn't help but feel like they brought it upon themselves by refusing to move into the ghetto. Now, and again, this wasn't, they didn't know anything about the concentration camps. This wasn't a ghetto to be killed, right? It wasn't like they were going to concentration camps. But this is what she writes.
I think people did get killed, but very few.
Yeah. People got killed, but I don't know. I just want to bring out a point. When a person feels like there was a cause, these people died. It's tragic. They were young and they died, but there was a cause, and maybe they brought it upon themselves. It's less painful.
Right.
The question, the emotional pain, because we're dealing with emotional pain, cause and meaning are two things that could take away some of the emotional pain, right?
Yeah, if there's logic involved.
If there's logic.
Right.
What we're scared of is randomness. It just happened. You mean there was no reason? In a sense, like, you mean it could have been me? Because it could have been me. It didn't have to be in Pittsburgh, and it didn't have to be in that house of worship. It could have been, God forbid, right? If we can ascribe a meaning to it, or a cause to it, it helps alleviate. So there's no question, I think, that people seek to understand cause and meaning. And it's when there's no cause and there's no meaning that we get the most disturbed. That's when we get really shaken up. That's when we really feel bad.
Can I say something?
Absolutely, you can say.
I disagree with you.
Okay.
But so much. I understand the cause of the murders. The cause was anti-Semitism. And that's where I'm stuck. I understand the cause. It does not make me feel any better, more accepting, because I understand the cause. I understand anti-Semitism. It doesn't make me feel afraid. It makes me feel overwhelming sadness, grief, horror. But it doesn't make me feel better that I know the cause of their murders. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Am I not going the same way that you're going? And it wasn't random. It wasn't. There was the cause.
When I'll tell you what. Maybe I'm not using the right words. When I say cause, I mean. When I say there was no cause, I mean it really. How could we have helped it? How could we have avoided it? We could not have avoided it. Nothing we could have done could have saved the situation. If there was something that somebody could have done and they didn't do, we say, and sometimes it's out of anger. It's that I've spoken to people and they told me, you know whose fault it is that this happened? It's that politician's fault. It's that person's fault. It's that group's fault. If somebody can point a finger at somebody and say, that's why it happened. That's what I mean by cause. We know what caused it. You're right.
Okay.
But we all can agree that there's nothing that we could have done that would have saved us. That's what's called pure evil. In other words, if we start a war with another country, or if we intervene, if we mix into a war with another country, two countries are at war, North and South Korea, and we send our troops and people die, we know why they died. They died defending their country. And even if you don't agree that they should have been defending the South Koreans, but at least it wasn't illogical. There was sense to it. Exactly. And then we can sort of come to terms with it. Whether it's meaning or it's something that we can make sense of. When we can't make sense of it, that's when, as you said before, it's paralyzing. That's when the grief sets in. Okay, a second thing, this is really just an introduction to it. Second thing, very important. Struggling with the faith in God due to suffering results from a lack of belief. If somebody suffers, and as a result of their suffering, they struggle with their faith in God, is that because they don't believe strongly enough? I want to put it in other words. Can a religious person question? That was the man's question. He said, Rabbi, you're not allowed to question, right? Rabbi, you're not allowed to question. Why? Because you believe you. He says to me, I'm not religious. I'm hedging my bets. I don't know exactly. So when something like this happens, it makes me struggle with my faith. If good things happen, it strengthens my faith. But you're not allowed to question if it's good, bad. You're never allowed to question. Do you think that's true?
No, I think you can question your faith. I mean,
Okay.
Look at the Holocaust.
Okay.
I interviewed people who lost every member of their family, extended, and these people from Poland, they're not a big fan of Hashem. Some of these people.
Well,
and other ones rationalize it in different ways, but
you're saying they're not a big fan of Hashem, but if somebody who is religious now, not who was once religious and lost his faith. Sure, somebody can be religious and lose their faith. Can somebody be religious, like me? I'm a rabbi, I'm religious, and can I question God? Can I struggle with my faith despite the fact that I'm deeply religious? That's right?
Yes.
What do you say? You say yes.
Yes, but you're learned so that you can find answers to help you support.
Okay.
And deal with it.
Okay.
Not doubt, but to deal with it.
So I'm going to say something. I can question, but I don't doubt. I question, and I struggle, but it doesn't cause me to doubt or to lose my faith.
Yeah, well, you're talking about the normal bad things that happen, but you're not talking about something like the Holocaust.
I'm not denying
so
that.
I think that if the situation got progressive,
I'm not denying that religious people lose their faith when they went through the Holocaust.
Right.
I'm asking you, can you be religious and while being religious still struggle with these questions?
Yes.
And the answer is yes. Okay, we're going to talk about it in a second. Let's look at one more question. When we suffer tragedy, or one more statement rather, when we suffer tragedy, God forbid, we are prone to feelings of loneliness. Do you think when people suffer tragedy, they feel isolated and lonely? That's a common response. They feel like God abandoned them, their friends abandoned them, society abandoned them, right? The world abandoned them. So yes, it definitely brings loneliness. We're going to skip the last one for now. So this is what I want to, let's start off. We're going to talk about, let's start off with text number 1 on page 103. Text number 1 on page 103 is a letter written by the Lubavitcher Rebbe to a woman who wrote about her doubts in God because of the Holocaust, as you mentioned. And she writes, how can I believe after the Jewish people went through this? And look what the Rebbe answers her. Text number 1 in English. I don't believe, says the Rebbe writes to her, I don't believe your assertion that you don't believe in God. In fact, it is clear that even you don't believe it. The proof is, you write in your letter that upon perceiving in your world a lack of justice and fairness, and upon recalling the Holocaust caused by Hitler, may his name be erased, you are disturbed. Now, if there were no force conducting and planning world events, why is it surprising when injustice occurs and the big swallows the small? Note that this question of unfairness is not only regarding the world-scale events like the Holocaust, even regarding simple day-to-day occurrences, we are disturbed. I think these are the key words in the Rebbe's letter. The Rebbe says we are disturbed when faced with unfairness and expect things to be different. Now, if there is no God, why are you disturbed? Why are you uncomfortable? What So let's read what the Rabbi says. Now the realms of the inanimate and the animal kingdom surely aren't expected to abide by the rules of justice. Who or what then do we expect to act justly? We must conclude that the uneasiness caused by these negative events must be due to an awareness of a force that is beyond the inanimate and animal realms and even the human realm. If somebody is disturbed, if somebody is uneasy, okay, it's because they know that there's a force that conducts the world in a sensible way. Why are we so shocked when there's senseless hatred? Why are we so? And I'm not talking about again. Let me make it clear. I'm not talking about your pain right now. Let's not talk about pain. Let's first talk about how could God exist and allow this to happen. If we struggle with that, if it bothers us that, and we cry out, how could God allow it to happen? It's only because we believe in God. We would not be, our sense of justice, people have a sense of justice, is only exists because we believe that there's a force that should be conducting the world in a just way, which means there's a superior being. Okay? And that's why we're so upset. Why didn't you do anything? You're there, so why didn't you do anything? Let's just read the last line. Therefore, when something isn't right, we desperately seek the cause for this unnatural state of events. Okay? Now, not only do people who have witnessed or been through the Holocaust struggle, you should know that Abraham also questioned God. It's in text number 2. I'm not going to read it. We'll see. But anyways, Abraham was informed by God that he was going to turn over Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham, of course, believed in God. You know, is there anybody that believed in God? It wasn't Abraham. You know how I know it was Abraham? Because Abraham was one person against the rest of the world. The rest of the world worshipped idols, and Abraham brought the belief in one God to thousands and tens of thousands of people. And when he heard that God was going to overturn Sodom and Gomorrah, he said, what do you mean? What about the righteous people that live there? Look what he says in text number 2. He says, it would be unthinkable, he's talking to God, it would be unthinkable for you to do such a thing. This is in Genesis chapter 18. To kill the righteous with the wicked, thereby making the righteous and wicked equal. It is unthinkable for you. Will the judge of the entire world not do what is just? Abraham questioned God. So I guess the point that we're making is that questioning and being disturbed is not a sign of a lack of faith. It is a sign of somewhere deep down you really believe. And that's why it bothers you so much. Moses questioned God. Job questioned God. And the question doesn't have to be an expression of disbelief. It could be just a cry of pain. Let's talk about the question, where is God? Let's talk about the question, where is God? A famous question. People ask it about the Holocaust. Where was God in the Holocaust? People ask it this week. Where was God? People ask it whenever it's a tragedy that they can't make sense of, that they cannot figure out. They ask, so where was God? Fascinating story of Moses that I'm going to confess. I learned this story tens of times. But preparing this class is the first time that I understood it in this way. Okay? I think it was an eye-opener. So, who was Moses? We all know that Moses was born 130 years into the Egyptian slavery. When he was born, the stargazers saw that the leader of the Jewish people, the redeemer of the Jewish people, was about to be born. And Pharaoh made a decree that all baby boys should be killed. Really, he wanted them to be killed upon their birth. He hired the midwives, the Jewish midwives, to kill the baby boys as soon as they were born. But they didn't listen to him. And so therefore, the best that he could do was to have his soldiers go around, and whenever they found a baby boy, they would drown the child in the Nile. They would throw the child in the Nile River. Moses was born, and his mother put him in a basket and set sail in the Nile River. The daughter of Pharaoh was passing by, and she saw a basket. She stretched out her arm. She brought the basket, and she saw a young baby, and she decided to keep the baby as her own child. She brought the baby into the palace. She's the one who named Moses Moshe. The name Moshe did not come from Moses' mother. It came from Batia, the daughter of Pharaoh. And he was raised. I mean, you must have seen the movie The Prince of Egypt. I don't know how accurate the movie is. I never watched it, but I know it from the original. He was the Prince of Egypt. He grew up in the king's palace. At one point, he knew the whole time that he was Jewish, by the way. He was not in denial. So, at one point, he walked out and he sees...
Was Moses circumcised?
Moses was born circumcised.
Oh.
But he lived... Let me just tell you something, side point. For the first 3 months of his life, he was born 3 months early. He was born premature. So anybody who's a preemie shouldn't think that they can't succeed in life. Moses was a preemie. So his mother did not have to worry. He was born 6 months after his mother remarried his father. That makes sense. They basically got divorced and then got remarried. So the soldiers did not think that she could possibly give birth until 9 months after the marriage. He was born after 6 months. So for 3 months he lived with his mother at home. So at 8 days he could have been circumcised as well, even though, as I said, he was born circumcised. When Batia finally found him when he was 3 months old, that's when the mother put him on the Nile, she needed somebody to nurse the child. He would not nurse from an Egyptian woman. So she found a Jewish woman to nurse. Who was the Jewish woman? Moses' mother. He grew up in his mother's home. But at some point he was returned to Batia to live in the palace. So he knew he was Jewish, he knew who his parents were, he knew his sister and brother. He goes out and he sees... Actually, before this story, parenthetically, he convinces Pharaoh that the Jews are not effective slaves if they work 7 days a week. He should give them a day off. What day off? So give them Saturday off. They got off every Saturday. Moses convinced Pharaoh. So they were already keeping Shabbat in Egypt, kind of unknowingly. They were not yet commanded to keep Shabbat. But Moses was already aware that Shabbat was a special day because his father was very learned, and therefore he convinced Pharaoh to give them off on Shabbat. He goes out and he sees an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Jew. And that taskmaster had in mind that he was going to beat the Jew to death. And Moses looked right and he looked left and he killed the Egyptian. That was the heat, that was the bitter part of the slavery. At that point in the slavery, Jewish babies were being killed right and left. Besides for the decree to put Jews, to throw the boys in the Nile, if the Jewish worker did not finish their quota of bricks, they would stuff in a living baby to be killed and to become a brick in the pyramid. So the Jews were experiencing a Holocaust. Okay? Now, I don't want to start comparing this to that. It's not important. But if they were killing babies with the snap of a finger, it says that Pharaoh was bathing in the blood of the infants that he killed. Doctors prescribed for him to bathe in blood, and he would kill babies and bathe in their blood. The men and the women were being worked day and night. It was a real Holocaust. It was real slavery. It lasted for over 100 years. Never did a slave escape from Egypt in 100 years. It wasn't like the slavery, but maybe we'll escape one day. Never in over 100 years did a slave escape. The Jews did not see a future. They were sunk in the exile of Egypt. And Moses had to run away because he killed an Egyptian. And until he was 80 years old, he did not return to Egypt. I don't know what age he ran away, maybe in his 20s. Until he was 80 years old, he did not return to Egypt. So, at the age of 79 or 80, I mean, we don't know exactly how old he was. It says when he took the Jews out of Egypt, he was 80. Maybe this was a year earlier. maybe he was only 79. He's shepherding his father-in-law's sheep in Midian. Jethro is his father-in-law. And he sees one of the sheep run away, and he finds a burning bush, the famous burning bush. And God speaks to him in the burning bush. And what does God say to him? Let us look in text number 4, page 107. Let's pay attention to the words. God said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of the slave drivers. I am aware of their suffering, and I have come to rescue them from the hands of Egyptians and bring them up from that land, and bring them to a good land, a spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Let's turn the page. Right? I can't pronounce all those words. The Jebusites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites. That was the land that they were going to. Page 108, it says, and now, God says, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I have seen how the Egyptians are oppressing them. So go, I will send you to Pharaoh. You will take my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Moses says to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? That I should take the children out of Egypt, children of Israel? And God replied, I will be with you, and this will be a sign that I sent you. When you take the people out of Egypt, you will serve God on this mountain. Okay, let's here's the focus. Moses...
Sorry to bother you, just hanging up a stone.
Sure. Moses said, I will come to them, and I will say to them that God has sent me. What will they say? What will they respond? You're going to see... You with me? No. Moses said to God, I will come to the children of Israel. You see what I'm reading? And I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they will say to me, what is his name? That's what they're going to ask me. What is his name? What shall I respond to them, says Moses? I want to come to the Jews who are in the middle of slave labor. And I'm going to say, guys, God sent me to redeem you. And you know what they're going to say? Well, what is God's name? God sent you to redeem us. What is his name? So Moses says, what shall I respond to them? God said to Moses, Eheyeh asher eheyeh. I will be what I will be. And he said, say the following to the children of Israel, Eheyeh, I will be, has sent me to you. Okay. Is that understood? Any questions? So, question number 1. That's what the Jewish people are going to ask God? What is his name? I mean, there are a lot of better questions to ask God. What would you ask God if you had the chance? What is his name? They might ask, prove that show us a miracle. That makes sense. You're really from God? Make a miracle. How do we know? How do we know you're legitimate? What does the name prove? I mean, if the Jews recognize the name, if it's a common name that everybody recognizes, then what does it prove? It still doesn't prove anything, right? Anybody can say, God sent me. Everybody knows. And if it's a name that nobody knows, how do they know that that's really God's? How does knowing the name, what does that even prove? Second question is, okay, that was 2 questions already. Oh. Why is that their question? And do they already know the name or not? Okay. Next question is, in this case, God uses an extremely uncommon name. You familiar with any of the names of God? Turn to page 127. Turn to page 127. There's 5 names of God on page 127. And you're going to tell me how many times they appear in the scripture. The first one is called Havaya. The witnesses, okay, it's the 4-letter name. Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. In Hebrew we call it Havaya. There's other religions that use another name. How many times does that name appear in scripture? 6,639. Elokim. Right? If you ask an Israeli, how do you say God without the K? Elokim. How many times does that appear in Scripture? Over 2,000. Kale. Kale, whenever we say God's name, we change it around. We don't want to say the real name. So Kale is actually pronounced without the K. Okay? So, how many times is that in Scripture? Kale? 235. Shakai. Shindalad Yud. 48. How many times is the name Eheyeh in Scripture, Brad? I know you would know this. How many times is the name Eheyeh in Scripture?
Well, it says 3.
3. And they're all in the same verse. When God asked Moses, what is your name? He said, Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh. And tell the children of Israel, Eheyeh has sent you. Why does God use his most uncommon name? In fact, if he wouldn't use that name, it would appear 0 times in Scripture. That's how uncommon it is. Why didn't he say, my name, Havaya, my name is Elokim, my name is Kale. Maybe he likes kale. You know, nowadays kale is very trendy food. Say kale. Maybe Shakai. Why Eheyeh? An unheard of name. So the answer to the question is going to be instructive to our question. If you think about it, what was bothering the Jews at that time? 210 years in exile, in slavery. There was a Holocaust for 210 years. Okay. It was only really bad for about 135 years. The first 85 years weren't so bad. But a 135-year Holocaust, where people were killed and a people was enslaved, and there was no hope. Nobody had even dreamed that they would ever get out. 135 years. And Moses said, I'm coming to redeem you. What is the question that the Jews have? You know what the question the Jews have? The Jews have a question. God heard our pain. They heard our cries. What did God say? I heard the cries of the people of Israel, and I'm coming to save them. You know what we say? You heard our cries? Where were you till now? Where were you when babies were being slaughtered? Where were you when the boys were being drowned in the Nile? Where were you when living babies were being stuffed into the cement? Where were you when Jewish men and women were beaten to death? That's what it means. What is your name? What is his name? Because they understood that a name shows on the personality of the person. What kind of God allows us to suffer for 135 years and then shows up one day and says, now I want to save the day? Does that make sense to you, Brad? Would you jump on the bandwagon and follow such a God who only wants to save you? Well, listen, if he saves you, that's nice. But what about next time yay, I want to become your follower, and when the next country comes and enslaves me, then you're going to disappear again? That's a very unreliable relationship. If you want to build a relationship with somebody, you don't want them to come in and out. They're going to show up when they want, and they're going to leave when they want. So let's look at, I think it's text number 5, page number 109. We're going back, page 109. Fascinating. Karen, how about you read? You would like to read? You don't want to read. Brad, would you want to read? That's okay.
This was Moses' question. I will come to the children of Israel, and I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. This will undoubtedly elicit the question, what is his name? The Jews will immediately ask, what kind of name? I.e. behavior? Is this to allow a terrible exile to endure for so many years, and only after thousands upon thousands of Jewish children have been murdered that's when we are told that I have heard their cry. I will descend to rescue them. Moses adds and emphasizes that he himself has this question and protest too. What should I tell them?
Excellent. Not excellent, but that's the question that the Jews had. And Moses said, I don't know what to answer them. They have a good question. Where were you for the past 135 years? So you know what God answered him? God answered him in text 6a, page 110. I'm sorry, 6b. 6a we already read. God said to Moses, I will be what I will be. Say the following to the children of Israel, I will be has sent me to you. What does that mean? Rashi says, I will be with them in this trouble, that I will be with them in their subjugation by other kingdoms. You know what God answered them? God answered, where was I for 135 years? I was with them. I was suffering along with them. And if they get into trouble again, which they will, and they find themselves enslaved to another nation, I will suffer along with them in that slavery too. I will be with them as I have been with them. Where was I? Right there with them. You know what kind of tree God appeared to Moses? A thorn bush. Why a thorn bush? God was telling them, Moses, I feel the pain. Thorn gives pain. I feel the pain of the Jewish people. I have decided to act now, but I have not been blind to their pain. Not only have I seen their pain, I feel their pain. Let's read text number 7. The Rebbe really, this is the Rebbe's explanation. He really spells it out. Let's look at the second paragraph. God hadn't ignored the suffering of the Jewish people in the bitter exile. Heaven forbid. On the contrary, I will be with them in this hardship. God is together with the Jewish people in their hardship. This doesn't only mean that God is found in their presence. Rather, he is found in their pain. As the prophet says, whenever they are in pain, he too is in pain. When the Jewish people suffer, this, so to speak, causes God to suffer too. I'll tell you what it makes me think of. And it's a sad thing, but it makes me think of this. God forbid a child is ill and has to go through very painful treatment. Painful treatment. And the mother goes along with the child, or the father goes along with the child. And the child may not understand, may be asking the same question. Why are you putting me through this? May not be able to make sense of it. But the mother is there and actually might feel the pain more than the child. In other words, what God did, he gave Moses a hug. Moses said, where were you? And God said, gave him a hug and said, I was right there with you. Right there with you. Now, that's not an intellectual response. That didn't answer the question. Why didn't you do anything about it? But the first thing God said was, don't think that I'm a God who goes on vacation and I come back when I want, and when I'm ready, I take you out of your suffering. I am always there with you. I have a neighbor. Well, I don't have him anymore, but he's alive, thank God. But he was my neighbor when I was living in Brooklyn. I grew up Empire Boulevard. His name is Rabbi Nissen Mangel. He survived Auschwitz at the age of 10 years old. And he speaks.
Should give me his number.
I should give you his number. You can call him. He speaks, and he's written books, I believe, about his experiences. And he talks all over about his experiences. And he's a religious man with a long white beard. And his talk is usually, where was God in the Holocaust? And I'm not as good as him. I mean, I can't tell you what he says. But you know what his answer is? Interesting answer. He said, God was with me on a daily basis. God saved my life hundreds of times. Every day, 10 months. He was only from when he was sent to Auschwitz till he was liberated was 10 months. In those 10 months, he escaped from death, and he tells his story. I'll give you a few examples. Examples. He talks about how, but you know what else he says? Interesting thing. Besides for the miracles that happened to him, which he describes, he says that one day that he found his father's tefillin. Basically, he was too young to be in Auschwitz because they only sent to work the children the people that were like 17 or 18 years old, that were old enough to work. Anybody younger than that. So the Jewish workers, when he got off the train, Jewish workers would tell them what to say. And he would tell them to say that you're 17 or 18. Now, two things. First of all, when he got off the train, his mother was holding his hand. And that was a big no-no. A mother holding the hand of a child, they would both be sent to the gas chamber. So instead, they told the mother, let go of your child, send him behind you so that he's not with you. You will be sent to work, and that way at least one of you will survive. When they came to tell the mother, he's holding his mother's hand, he said, my mother held my hand tighter. And the guy came back 2 or 3 times, or 3 or 4 times, to tell the mother, let go of your child's hand if you want to live. And she held his hand tighter, and every time he came back, she held his hand tighter. Now the only way they survived that selection was that there was no selection that day. Unbeknownst to the German soldiers, Yamach Shemoy, may his name be erased, Mengele ran away because he thought that they were going to be bombed or whatever it was, so he ran away. The selection didn't happen until a week later. And by that time, already his mother wasn't holding his hand, but he was still a 10-year-old kid and he was very short. So he decided he didn't think they would believe him if he said he was 17. So he decided that he's going to hide behind his father. And he wanted to hide behind his father in such a way that when his father was sent to work, he would go with his father. But he was found right away. Couldn't tried to hide behind his father. Mengele himself called him over. How old are you? He said, I was a short 10-year-old kid. And he said, I'm 17. And Mengele started to laugh. Yamach Shemoy. I shouldn't even say his name. Started to laugh. 17? I know you can't be older than 11, but go with your father. So, this is a person, it's not for me to say. I'm not coming to tell people what they should believe. I'm telling you an experience of a Holocaust survivor. He felt that God was with him. He was suffering. He lost his father, for sure. His mother and his sister survived with him. They were separated in the middle, but all 3 of them survived. He was on the death march. He said almost every day he wanted to give up. And the way, a whole story, a German soldier let him drink from his container. Every day the German soldier a Nazi, would come to him and talk to him and let him drink. He had coffee, and they would get hot coffee in a container, and every day he would give him to drink. I think he said every few hours he would give him to drink. And this German soldier kept him alive in the death march. But he says that one day he found his father's tefillin because he didn't have clothes to wear because nothing fit him. So they sent him to the pile of old clothes that everybody took off to find clothes to wear. He found his old clothes and he found his father's tefillin. And he said hundreds of inmates, after 10 o'clock at night, after lights out, after whatever it was, after everybody had to be asleep, would come and line up by his father to put the tefillin on for a minute. Because those people, why? Why did they risk their lives to put on tefillin? It was for a few weeks until he was separated from his father. For those few weeks, every night, there was a line of people, the entire night, people were coming to put tefillin. Why did those people come to put tefillin on? Because they felt that God was with them. Did they not suffer? Were they not in pain? Of course they were suffering. But Jewish religion believes, and this is what people come to realize, that they find comfort in God. How many people, when they suffer a loss, God forbid, or in the time of tragedy, turn to the rabbi to ask questions? I know it firsthand. They turn to a synagogue to pray. Why? Why? If they're suffering, why do they just stop believing? But they don't. The fact is that some people do. And I'm not questioning why people stop. I'm not questioning, Brad, why people lose their faith. It's not a question. Why people lose their faith makes perfect sense. How could they believe? What I'm trying to say is that people find God. Because in truth, God is there. And God is like that parent who's holding the child's hand and is there, and that's what God told Moses. You want to know where I was? I was right there with you the entire time. And I feel the suffering more than the human beings can only tolerate a certain amount of suffering. God can feel even a higher level of suffering, more than the human being can feel. The tragedy by God is even greater. Okay, we're going to skip a little bit because we're running out of time, and maybe there's many important points that we have to talk about. And so, the question is, what do you mean? So how could God allow it to happen? How could God allow it to happen? Okay, we know that it's healthy to feel pain. In other words, when I say it's healthy to feel pain, I mean, if we didn't feel pain, it would be a problem. If we didn't have questions, it would be a problem. Are we so cruel? Are we so insensitive that we don't feel the pain? That we don't have questions? We should cry out to God and say, what are you doing? We may even be able to feel God's presence in the suffering, but we cannot understand it. We cannot make sense of it. Are we supposed to make sense of it? We can't make sense of it. There's nothing, I cannot give you a ration. I don't understand it. You don't understand it. We will never understand it. However, if we could understand it, there would be an explanation. God will send a message. This is why. 135 years in the Egyptian slavery, you want to know why? This is why. And everybody say, oh, that's why. Okay, good. Now I'm happy. No such thing. But we could understand that we can't understand. We could understand that we are not capable of understanding. The famous example, and you see, I spent, I think, 55 minutes or 50 minutes talking about the question, how we can still believe even if we have a question, and the response that God himself gave. God himself said, I am with you. And there's an article, you can look in the page, text number 9, there's an article by Jay Litvin who explains how during his illness he suffered from cancer for 4 years before he died. And he wrote that he found God. He found God was always right next to him. It's not something that I can preach. It's not about preaching. It's just an idea that a person can experience it. But after all is said and done, let's just give a little bit of an explanation. Not because we want to explain the pain away, but just to give us some. Why can't we understand God's ways? You know, let me be very simplistic. What's the reason why God allowed this to happen? What's the reason? Anything. I'm not talking about one specific thing. What's the reason why God allows evil to exist? Or bad things to happen to good people? What's the reason? What do you think is the simple reason?
Just because. Okay. Because. That's it.
How could God allow evil to happen just because?
It's part of his plan.
That's, I think, the very straightforward answer. It's part of his plan. Am I satisfied with that answer? Are you satisfied with that answer? Does that make you feel better that it's part of God's plan?
Well, we live in the short run, so so he could be thinking, millions of years ahead.
So, Brad, let me just show you this. Karen doesn't want to accept that it's part of God's plan. Because how could it be part of God's plan? Right? How could it be part of God's plan? But Brad is saying that it could be part of God's plan. We just don't understand it. So, on an intellectual level, you're correct. On an intellectual level, of course. That's such an easy answer. God has a plan that we can't understand. On an emotional level, we can't come to terms with it. The pain is still hurts. It's still real. So we have this problem, which is why we have to realize that God is not giving us explanations. God never once came and said, doesn't say anywhere in the Torah, this is the reason for suffering. In fact, you know what God says? God says that you will never understand why people suffer until Mashiach comes. There's even a story about Elijah the prophet. At one time, a rabbi Elijah the prophet goes around at night and does things hiddenly. And there was a prophet that wanted to go with him. Not a prophet, a sage that wanted to go with him. And he says, you can come with me, but you may not ask questions. And a whole story how he went to an old man and an old woman, and they had one cow, and he killed the cow. And the old man and the old woman were so nice to them. And he got in the middle of the night, he killed the cow, and they left. And he came to a rich man's house who was very mean to them, and he helped him out in some way. And whoever was nice to them, he did bad back, and whoever was good to them, he did good back. The whole story, I don't have time to say it. Maybe after the recording. Maybe next week. The bottom line is, the sage couldn't hold himself back, and he asked, why? Why are you doing this? And he sent him home. He said, if you ask why, you have to go home. On an intellectual level, we understand that God does things and we can't understand. But that doesn't mean that God is not suffering along with us, because he suffers for our pain. There's a famous example. Imagine your ancestor from 500 years ago shows up to Long Island, and he walks into a room, and he sees that there's a man tied up, laying down on a table. And there's 7 men with masks on their face. They're holding knives. They're about to cut into him. What do you think his reaction would be? He would scream, "Help! Murderers! Bandits!" Right? But you, being his great-great-great-granddaughter, will say, Zayda, we're in the emergency room of LIJ. That man needs an emergency operation to save his life. Those are doctors. They're not murderers. And what's the difference between you and your Elta Zayda? He had no idea. He sees things from his perspective. He doesn't understand why. The pain is real pain. That patient is going to hurt. But the pain is to save his life. Now, if it would be so nice if I could explain to you, and therefore anything that bad happens, come here and I'm going to explain to you why it happened. No. It's unfathomable. We cannot comprehend why it makes sense. If we would be able to comprehend, if we'd be able to process it, we wouldn't cry out against it. But I guess the point that we're making in this lesson is that the pain is allowed to be real, and it doesn't have to affect our belief in God. We can actually, we should draw closer to God in a time of pain. We should draw closer to God. We shouldn't shy away from God. God is the source. He is our benevolent Father. He is our Creator. He is our source of comfort. Just like the child who's going through a painful treatment holds her mother's hand tighter. But why doesn't her mother explain why she has the pain? The mother can't explain it to her. She'll never understand. Maybe the mother herself doesn't understand. But the mother is there. Okay? So, on an intellectual level, it's an easy answer. God has a plan. On an emotional level, we know that God is with us. And there's a very important difference between how we perceive tragedy. What do we do with our frustration? What do we do with our struggles? Does it create grief? And by the way, grief, let's say a person, God forbid, loses a parent. They're meant to grieve for 7 days. If they don't grieve, they're being cruel. And then there's another period of 30 days and 12 months. And we went through this in another class, Journey of the Soul. And there's a process, but it can't remain forever. That paralyzing, overwhelming feeling cannot remain forever. It has to, at some point, be channeled. Take that intense feeling and channel it to doing something good and productive. I don't know if you get Chabad emails or if you've seen in the news or what it is. What has the Chabad response been to this tragedy? The Chabad response in Pittsburgh, Chabad of Pittsburgh, said we're going to put up 1,100 mezuzahs. 11 people were killed, 100 mezuzahs for each person. Chabad.org said, we're going to make a website where people can type in a special good deed that they're going to do in memory of these people. Many people feel like they want to go visit a synagogue. Because I don't visit a synagogue. But if this happened in a synagogue, I'm going to be there in synagogue this week. You know, there's an international conference of Chabad rabbis this week. All the Chabad rabbis from all over the world come to Brooklyn, New York, once a year for a very special weekend. And it really re-energizes us and rejuvenates us. And you know, many of them are struggling with what? They know that this week, of all the weeks, there's going to be a lot of people in their synagogue. And there's going to be a lot of people waiting to hear what is the rabbi going to say. And they're going to go be in Brooklyn. They're going to have somebody replay. If it was a quiet Shabbos, okay, they could take off a Shabbos. It's important, you know. Somebody else will take them over. Somebody else will give out the jobs or whatever it is. But this Shabbos to go away, okay. I don't know how they're going to decide, right or left. But the point is that many people are saying, wow, we're going to be in synagogue this week. I told you before that Monday night we had a little group around the table, 6 people, including my wife and I was 8 people, including my kids. It was more than 8 people. I don't remember how many kids were sitting there. You know what I told the 2 high school students? I said, you're going to start a club. In high school they have clubs, a goodness and kindness club. And you're going to get your friends to come together, and we're going to, every 2 weeks or however long the club meets, we're going to package things for Hanukkah. We're going to do toys for sick children. We'll send packages to Israeli soldiers. We'll care packages to people in the assisted living. Whatever we're going to do, we're going to think of ways of doing goodness and kindness because we care. Because we don't want to just say, what should we do? What should we do? And the young people are the ones who have all the energy. What should we do? What can we do? Rabbi. What should I tell them? Go to Pittsburgh and go to the funeral? Is that what they should do? Fine. Let them go to Pittsburgh and be by the funeral. Beautiful. But Really what they should do is, they should say, we are. And then the college students said, okay, they have clubs in high school. What should I do? I said, you do the same thing in your college. And they all walked away shaking their heads. You're right. So when we realize that, see, I don't have time for most of the things that are in here, but let me read one more text. Page 118. We'll conclude with this. And you'll read on your own, you'll read the other text. Very interesting things. Very interesting things. Text 12a. It's a verse in Psalms. It's a very famous verse in Psalms. And written by King David. And he writes, my God, why have you forsaken me? You are far from my salvation and my outcry. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, a German rabbi in the 1800s, writes, instead of reading the word as lama, meaning for what reason have you forsaken me? What does it mean, why have you forsaken me? For what reason, why have you forsaken me? Read the word lama. Just put the emphasis on the second syllable, meaning for what purpose. Lama means why. Lama means for what. In other words, we have to ask ourselves, and this is developed in the next text, text 13, text 14, you'll look at it yourself, but it is developed, and we ask ourselves, not why did God do this to me, but for what purpose? What can I do with this? How should I respond to this that God has done to me? We don't want God to do anything more to us. It's enough. We need Mashiach now. But let us not let our pain go to waste. Let us not allow our pain to be unproductive. I just read last night a quick story, and I'll finish with this. Somebody's writing that her grandmother in Hungary, she was taken to the camps in 1944. There was a girl, Esther. So what was special about this Esther? This Esther had a job to clean the house of one of the German officers. She was lucky. She was lucky because her job was to do his laundry and to clean his house, and therefore she would get extra pieces of food, and she would distribute. She was able to get extra food from the German, and she would distribute it to some of the girls that really were starving. Very like a selfless girl. She would bring the extra food and give it to other people. And she tells a story how one day they heard screaming and yelling from the German's house, and all of a sudden a soldier comes into the barracks, calls two girls, and tells them to come, and they come back carrying Esther. She was beaten. Still alive, but she was beaten. Many weeks later, she told them what happened, that basically there was some leftover food, which usually the German let her have. This time she took it, and he came home, and he started yelling at her, what are you taking my food for, you thief? And he started to beat her. He beat her unconscious. And they took her. Okay, this was the girl. And she was very, very broken that she couldn't help anybody anymore. After they were liberated, many of them were ill with typhus. And Esther was there as well. And she, when she was brought in, there were many people just lying there. They were like, after they finally were liberated, and now they're sick in bed, they don't know if they're going to live or they're going to die. And Esther was brought in one day, and that night she got up and she gave a pep talk. And she said, we won them. We won those beasts. And God did not make us survive for nothing. We have to continue to have family. We have to get married and bear children. And we have to continue the Jewish nation. And she gave a whole pep talk. And unfortunately, the story is that she died that night. She went to sleep and she never woke up. This was the Esther. This is the story. It doesn't have a happy ending. I'm sorry. If you were looking for a happy ending, there's no happy ending. But what did she say? What did she say? She said, there's a reason. What are we going to do with our pain? What are we going to do with our frustration? What are we going to do with our struggle? We're not going to become overwhelmed by it, but we're going to channel it to do good. Let's take that feeling, let's take that uneasiness, that being disturbed, that pain, that frustration, that whatever you want to call it, and let's turn it around. If you thought you're going to walk out of this room tonight and feel good and walk out with a smile and say, that was a great class, Yasher Koyach, Rabbi Brownstein, you really you soothed my soul, then next week we'll talk about happiness. Next week we'll talk about how to deal with stress, how to stay happy, even if hopefully by next week we'll be able to talk about happiness again, hopefully. But the bottom line is, God is here, and God is with us, and we have to take our frustration and use it, channel it for doing great things. So hopefully we have Mashiach now, and we will have an answer to all our questions. Next week, same time, same place, all are invited. Bring your friend.